it was it was Michael Chandler sat out for 2 years to wait for Conor McGregor and ended up fighting Paddy.
That is really funny. I can't lie.
Hello everyone, welcome back. This is the MMA Outsiders episode 116. My name is Zain Bando, that is Pat Danna. To my right, happy to be back with you guys once again for another edition. Sorry for a bit of a later release this week. I was not feeling 100%. It happened to work out a little bit better in both of our schedules, but I'm happy to be here. Pat, how are you so far this week? And have you mentally recovered from the very heavy combat sports weekend that was this past weekend? Because I gotta be honest with you, the last few weeks it felt like a whirlwind to me. So to have February end on a bit of a I guess not really a dry note, but to have February kind of end where we still have to wait a while for things to look forward to again. How are you handling this week as such?
No, I mean, it's been a crazy week. There's no shorting that. I mean, it's still all settling in for me. So I guess we'll have to, like you said, just wait and see till everything has to play out, because there's a lot that has been announced lately, and just there was so much news to take in this past week. Just so much going on in the combat sports world. It's actually kind of insane looking back on it, how much has happened in the past week. It might be one of the bigger weeks of announcements we've ever had.
Yeah, so I guess that's a perfect segue. So we're gonna do something on this show that we normally don't do, and we're basically going to dissect every single announcement that we possibly can. We really had no plan going into this show before we decided that we were gonna do it this way. But given the news avalanche, if you will, as to what transpired this past week, we felt that it was the only way to give you to give you guys everything in such a succinct and that way you're only going to one source instead of multiple sources, et cetera, et cetera. But before we get into all of that and so much more, just a few quick reminders. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench podcast number. Very, very important that you do this. We're really trying to push the subscriber count. It's got over the 900 subscriber mark fairly recently. We're really trying to hone in that push to 1,000. So if you like the content that you see today, if you like the content that I put out on Bando's breakdowns or any of the other shows that are taking place across the network, please be sure to like and subscribe. It would be very much appreciated. You can do just that by going to youtube.com/ETP network, of course, to find out more, including all of our content, very, very easily correlated by playlists and so much more. And if you want more bonus coverage and other types of content as well, please be sure to subscribe. It's our new venture. It's the Empty the Bench Podcast Network Substack page. We have a lot of stuff going out there right now. Will Charlton's noteworthy in the NCAA just released recently. Grant Winsauer pumping out 2 NFL stories a week. And we also have tons of other content on the way, including my own Zanzinger Part 2, which is supposed to be dropping on Saturday, March 1st. So a perfect segue into March Madness and so much more. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not thank our good friends over at Playback. They've been a wonderful sponsor to us. We've really been trying to pump out as many streams as we can, specifically with the NBA as the playoff push as closer. So, of course, if you like what you see on the Playback end, you can do so and so much more. We're going to get into talking about UFC Seattle, which took place this past weekend. We had a lot of interesting fights on this card, but we're going to start with the main event, of course. It was Song Yadong taking on Henry Cejudo, a very anticlimactic ending, if I do say so myself. Pat, what were your thoughts on this fight overall, kind of the way the fight ended, and just, I guess, the overall outrage after the fight, because there were a lot of people on both sides of the fence in regards to how this officiating job by Jason Herzog was handled on both sides of the equation. So what did you think of it?
I thought the whole situation was weird. I mean, there's no other way to really describe it. I think everyone was confused. Everyone was like, what the hell is going on right now? And I mean, I don't want to say Herzog made a bad decision, But I think that if he did make the decision he made, he should have probably taken a point. Even when fouls are unintentional, when they have a significant impact on the fight, especially the way that this one did, I feel like
Right.
you kind of have to take the point. And that's where I feel he messed up. I don't know if he messed up in the way he handled everything, starting the fourth round and all of that. I don't think that was necessarily the wrong thing to do, but I just think that he should have taken a point. Either way, I mean, Song Yudong looked really good. I did like how his takedown defense looked. I mean, anytime Cejudo went to clinch, anytime he went to attempt a takedown, Song just completely shucked him off. There was never a time where it looked like Cejudo was even close to getting into those grappling exchanges with Song. So that was a really impressive layer to this fight that I feel like isn't being talked about enough because of the controversy. Song's takedown defense looked incredible. And I mean, Henry, his boxing looked pretty good too. He was able to hang in there with Song on the feet. He ate a lot of heavy shots, and he was in there boxing in the pocket with him, and that's how the fight ended, with Henry kind of in the pocket boxing, and then he got poked, and then it was just chaos from that poke. He took all 5 minutes, which I actually think was good from him. I think you should
Yeah,
take
it
all
was
five
good.
minutes.
I
Like
agree.
we like I say this all the time, but we crap on fighters too much for not taking the full time or taking as much time as they need whenever a foul happens. I mean, we saw it in the Israel Adesanya fight where he got poked in the eye a little bit there or whatever, and then tried to just wave it off, and then he got knocked out right after. Like you
Yeah, I
need
mean,
to take the time.
yeah, you need to take the time, and I guess another example of that would be the Pereira Jamal Hill fight.
Yeah, but that happened a little bit opposite. I mean, that actually went in Pereira's favor. But no, I think that if a fighter needs a couple seconds, a couple minutes, that's not a problem, And obviously Cejudo did because his eye was messed up bad. So I think that Henry did the right thing taking the 5 minutes. I know he caught some flack for that, but I just think Henry was going to try to fight through it, was going to try to take all the time he needed, even in between rounds. And then when he realized it wasn't getting any better and was only getting worse, I think he made the right decision. I really don't think anyone's at fault here. I can't say Song's at fault for the eye poke, even though he should have kept his hand not extended with his fingers pointed out. I just don't. I don't know if anyone's really at fault here. It was just very unfortunate. And I think if anything, if Herzog did what he did, he should have taken a point. But that's really my only fault with this. I personally would
Right.
like to see a rematch next. I don't know. It seems like Dana doesn't want it, but it seems like Cejudo and Song are both open to it, so maybe they'll be able to do some convincing there. I don't know though. What do you think about that part?
So I'm gonna ask you one more follow up question because I have a few thoughts on just the overall stoppage. Um, do you agree that round four should have started? That's where I think most of the MMA community is very confused because if it was any other scenario in that general sense, the fight would have been stopped more than likely immediately. And I think 95% of fans, even the ones that are relatively new to the sport, were probably thinking the same thing. So that was the confusing part to me, was trying to fully interpret the rule, which I do think Oposta did a very good job of doing that. But I think if it wasn't for his kind of overall oversight as to how the rule is being followed and should be followed, I think it would have been a lot more confusing than what it was.
I don't know why he had to start round four. Like from what I could tell, when the fourth round starts like that and then nothing happens, he immediately calls a timeout and whatever. If he technically started the fourth round, then it should have been scored on the judges' scorecards. It should have been a 10-10 round for both fighters, which makes things weird because it wasn't scored. That round wasn't scored at all on the scorecard. It's like it didn't happen,
Right.
It's like he never started that fourth round. So I don't know what him starting the fourth round did exactly. Maybe he had to start the fourth round for it to go to technical decision, but I thought
That would be my only inkling as to why.
but then it makes it weird because in the technical decision, they didn't even score the fourth round. Do you know what I mean? That's why it's strange to me because
It's true. Weren't they like 29-28
yeah, it was
scorecards?
3 round scorecards. It was 3 round scorecards basically, which I feel like in my opinion at least, that's enough. You know, if you have a 5 round fight that ends controversially after the third round, I feel like that's fine. You know, you could score the fight as if it were a 3 round fight or whatever. I just don't understand why the fourth round thing even happened. It was very confusing. But I still don't have an answer for it. I'm sure Herzog might make a statement at some point, or the UFC might. I don't know because it was very weird.
Yeah, it was weird for sure, but let me just be honest with you, technical decision or not, I think you and I can both agree that Song Yudong was well on his way to winning that fight regardless.
Yeah,
So, I
probably.
mean, I think even stoppage or not, I don't think it would. I don't think it would have made a difference. And I know that some people were trying to claim that it was, and I'm sure you saw this too. But I saw some people who I'd rather not name, tried to claim that what Song did was intentional and to do it. I mean, if he is legitimately apologizing in the way that he did, which he did in his post fight interview, I think that's as honest and as forthcoming as you could possibly get. So I think those arguments about that need to be put to bed. And I'm actually on the side of where I disagree with you. I actually agree with Danny here, and I think that a rematch isn't warranted between these two because I think regardless, and I was wrong in my prediction for this fight. It was one of the three fights I got wrong on the card. I went 9-3 overall. I think looking back on the fight, if those two were to fight a couple more times, I still think Song Yudong would win just because Cejudo is an older version of what he once was, and he just simply isn't the same fighter anymore. And it's clear that Yudong was able to exploit weaknesses that otherwise Cejudo wouldn't have had years ago when he was champion. So I actually am on the side of Dana to where I don't want to see a rematch. I think both of these two should move on, whether that's Cejudo taking one more fight as a legacy fight or him legitimately deciding that it's time for him to hang it up. You know, or just completely going in a different direction. But what I do know is I think that fight being run back, I don't think is that great for business. It's not like Cejudo had just lost his championship in the fight before that, and is still a number one contender. He was lower in the top 10 of the rankings, which I totally understand. It's mainly based on his name value alone, and I understand that. But if you want to keep Song Yudong moving, if you want to keep him active, and I understand why they want to do it. And as I alluded to at the beginning of this, it was an anticlimactic ending. But with the way the fight was progressing and with the way that Yudong was able to piece him up on the feet and how he was using his leg kicks and stuff, I don't really think a rematch will make much of a difference. But if they make the fight, it'll be interesting to see what adjustments Cejudo makes. Do you have any final thoughts on the main event before we move on?
No, just I do agree with you that, Song was probably on his way to winning that fight. I just feel like, it should have been a draw only because I feel like the point should have been taken. So if the point
Right.
got taken and it was a draw, I would like to see a rematch just to lay anything to bed. But technically, Song did win. He won the decision. So
Yeah, yeah, which is my argument. Trust me, if it was a draw, I would be on your side too. I would be another person clamoring for a rematch, but I could see the UFC's position as to why they don't believe so, and knowing how kind of unimpressed Dana seemed to be at the post fight presser with how the fight ended, I think he's probably the last person on the planet that wants to see those two fight again. So if he's the
yeah,
one saying it, then it probably and if he's that stern about it, then it probably won't happen. Let's move
yeah,
on though to the co-main event rematch of a fight that took place almost 7 years ago now. Anthony Hernandez versus Brendan Allen. You got at this one right. I got at this one wrong. Anthony Hernandez was able to essentially out grapple Brendan Allen and win a decision. What did you think of this fight? I thought this fight was awesome, and think I think this fight in so many ways, unfortunately, he got screwed over because I'm pretty sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I don't think it won a performance bonus. And overall, though, I thought it was a decent fight, and I thought that Anthony Hernandez did really really well. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really fun showcase of two high-level grapplers. I thought it was very similar to their first fight. I kept bringing up their first fight when on our preview, and I actually picked Hernandez partially because of the way the first fight went, and I feel actually kind of vindicated for doing so because this
Yeah,
fight was
you
fairly
should.
similar to their first fight. I mean, the grappling exchanges, the scrambles, the reversals, especially in that first round, were 100% there. But then Hernandez kind of took over after that first round. He started to be more smart with his control and just more dominant with his grappling. And he really wore on Brendan Allen and was able to, just kind of do what he needed to in the wrestling and control those second and third rounds after a back and forth first round. I just think Hernandez is very, I don't know. He's just kind of a beast, his cardio, his wrestling, even he has decent hands on the feet too. Like he's very well rounded and he's very interesting. He's definitely someone to watch out for at this weight class. I just feel like there are certain moments where he leaves himself to being caught potentially. Like I don't know. I'm still 50-50 on how far I see Hernandez going and in the middleweight division because it's very interesting to me with
Yeah,
his
and
entire career.
right, and as we alluded to, it was either I think it was as soon as or as most recent as last week. What do you do with the top half of the middleweight division?
Yep.
And Danny even admitted they have a good problem on their hands to have right now.
Hmm.
And I think we're back in the same position where we're asking ourselves the same question because even though Hernandez looked good, I think I would feel differently if Hernandez was able to finish Allen. Uh, based on based on where his stock should rise in this division. Because as we know, looking at the rankings, the top half of the middleweight division, specifically that top five, is a complete mess. So I think regardless of what direction the UFC goes in, it'll probably end up being intriguing because you'll at least know that the best middleweight contenders are fighting each other, regardless of how they're matched up. If you were to play armchair matchmaker and if you were in the war room, what do you think personally should be next for Hernandez? And do you think this Delite fight coming up in a few weeks will probably have something to do with it as well?
It very well could, because just like you said, the division's a mess. The top 8 of the division above Hernandez, because he's ranked number 9 now, is just a complete mess. Vittori's booked, Cannonier's coming off a fight. Like maybe you do Cannonier. I don't know if I love that fight, but like you got to do something. He's got to fight up. He's on a massive win streak. Just beat Brendan Allen. Like Hernandez shouldn't be fighting down. It's just when he fights up, I have no clue who they would match him up against at this
Yeah,
point.
you just alluded to it. The top nine now is stacked. Anthony Hernandez moving into that ninth spot. Yeah, I mean, really, any direction you go in, with a couple of these guys is very very interesting. Obviously, Imamov coming off of a win, of course, Strickland just coming off of a loss. Hamzat is still lingering. What do you do with him? It looks like the UFC is going to go in the direction of giving him the title shot next, and then you kind of have all these outliers. Israel Adesanya's lost a couple in a row. Robert Whitaker's still lingering. Ohio's still there. I mean, it is a division to where you could mix and match these guys any which way until Sunday, and I think middleweight fans would not be disappointed. And it's really unfortunate. And I had been meaning to bring this point up to you last week when we spoke about middleweights too, Pat. But it just begs the argument. Like, I understand the UFC isn't a tournament run business, but I feel like they're in such a position that we're having sort of a middleweight contenders mini tournament would only make the most sense. Obviously, they're not gonna do that. But if you think of it almost in a tournament style way to where they match these fights to where they're happening every couple of months to get as much clarity in the division as possible, that might be the best course of action. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. And it's like, it's a good problem to have, like Dana said, even just doing like something, not official, like no official tournament or anything like that, but just like you said, like something that, they know that they're kind of just eliminating guys and, pushing guys up with wins over others. Like, just something like that would be really interesting. I don't know. I think Hernandez is in a very good spot, but it's just like, what do you do next with him? Honestly, looking at the rankings, I think Robert Whitaker might be the
That's what
next
I
best option.
that's what I was gonna say
Mhm.
because A, he's the biggest name that's not currently on a slump that makes you question if he can still compete with the best in the world because he can. So
And that's the thing. It'd be really cool to see how Whitaker could deal with a guy like Hernandez's constant pressure and wrestling and just everything. Like it'd be very interesting to see that because we haven't really seen Whitaker go up against too many like wrestlers the way Hernandez is. So I feel like it'd be really intriguing to see how Whitaker would deal with that too, because we just saw he struggled with Hamzat in his last fight, but Hernandez is just a different style of grappler than Hamzat. So seeing how he could handle that would be big in my opinion.
yeah, it would be big for sure. And then, of course, looking at the top of the well, Pat, is it far fetched to assume that the UFC he tries to potentially run, Imava versus Strickland in a title eliminator fight, especially just given that Chimaev may end up getting the next title shot after all. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I mean it's either Imavov Strickland, Imavov Barayo, like something along those lines. They have to do something to determine who's going to get that next title shot. I mean, you could just give it to
whoa.
Imavov too, honestly. But that's the thing is like, is Imavov really going to wait out all this time?
That's a major question to where I think him taking a headline fight on a fight night or something before the fall I think makes the most sense in the world too. And I also think too that obviously this fight's in a couple weeks, but when you look at the Dmitry Vittori fight, I think the loser of that fight probably won't be back in a similar position again, and the winner is almost like that second or third wild card tier to where they're just going to be sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens in the top five and top six to see where they kind of fit in that division later this year to where they're going to be the ones playing the waiting game more than anybody.
Yeah.
So that's going to be other interesting people. Just wanted to butt in here really quick to remind you guys the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. For those of you who don't know what Playback is, without further ado, here we go. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together, and of course, you can do so by joining our community going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And with that, we will get back to the show. Let's move over now, though, from the middleweight division to the lightweight division because we had some chaos there, too. Within the last 48 hours, the shocking news broke that Dan Hooker is out of his UFC 313 co-main event with Justin Gaethje. And at the time that we're recording this, there is no replacement for Justin Gaethje. But by the time this airs and gets to all of you, there probably will be a replacement. When I woke up the other morning to see that this was real, at first I couldn't believe it, and of course I saw who initially reported. I'm like, okay, it's probably legit. And then of course Dan Hooker uh, puts out the exclusive with one of the local outlets there. Very very disappointing news. An apparent hand injury from what I understand. I don't know, man. I feel like the UFC's injury bug is starting to creep up on them a little bit to where just something had to happen with this UFC 313 card, and hopefully the only domino that's occurred in terms of pullouts, in terms of major pullouts, that is um has occurred given who's fighting in the main event. But what was your initial reaction to this? And as given where we sit right now at the time that we're recording this, do you think the UFC will eventually find a replacement for Gaethje to keep Gaethje on the card?
Oh yeah, I think Gaethje's definitely going to get a replacement. I think a report came out earlier, just a little bit before we started recording, that they're planning to have an announcement on Gaethje's replacement in the next 24, 48 hours. So like you said, by the time the show airs, we could already have a Gaethje replacement. I know there's been a couple guys talked about in terms of who's going to replace him.
I'd like to
Dariush.
I'd like to see Gamrot. How about you?
Yeah, he's another one who's recently had his name thrown into the mix. Personally, I'm not a fan of it only because when you have a fight like Gaethje Hooker, right?
Right.
You're expecting violence. You're expecting a war. You're expecting you're expecting something. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like in a fight against Gamrot with Gaethje, I don't know if you have that same expectation. It'd be a decent fall from what we were just announced, and not because Gamrot's that much worse than Hooker or anything. They just fought and had a really close fight, but I just don't know if a Gaethje Gamrot fight will get the people excited the way that a different fight would. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to do it. I don't know if that's a great replacement. It's also a different style matchup for Gaethje. He'd have to start training for a wrestler now instead of a striker. Like, it'd just be really annoying, I guess, in my opinion, honestly.
Okay.
I want to see John Silva take it. I want to see John Silva.
That would be a wild. That would be a. I don't know if you know who this is, but that would be a Krzysztof Soshinsky esque turnaround. In case you don't know who I'm talking about, he fought on UFC 97 and UFC 98. He was the first fighter at the time in the modern Silva era to compete on back-to-back UFC events. So, Silva taking another fight in less than a month's time would be pretty wild.
Well, and the
So
thing is, he already moved up for a short notice lightweight fight with Drew Dober in the past. His name is jumping right now. He's technically, I don't think he's ranked at 145 yet. He should be, in my opinion. But I think that his name and just everything he's brought so far, I don't think he doesn't deserve it. Like, he went up to lightweight on short notice and knocked out a guy like Drew Dober. He's been knocking everyone out. I feel like that is the best replacement in terms of trying to get another fight like the Dan Hooker fight would have been for Gaethje.
yeah,
Should it happen? Maybe not. Maybe he's still banged up from the Melsick fight. Maybe he had an injury or something. You never know.
right,
But
exactly.
I feel like that would be the most fun replacement. However, Gamrot would probably make the most sense for Gaethje still having someone with decent name value, and someone that really has already ingrained themselves into the top of that lightweight division and, would deserve a shot in a sense. I know he's coming off a loss, but I mean, half of the top 10 is at this point. So it's not like it's a bad matchup. I just don't know. I want to see that exciting. I want to be excited for the Gaethje fight the way I was for the Hooker fight. I want to have some of that excitement retained.
No, for sure. And just to pipe in here briefly, John Silva is not currently ranked in this week's edition of the featherweight rankings,
Which is
so.
crazy.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately for him, but hey, if he gets that fight and he somehow pulls off one of the biggest upsets of the year, he will certainly be ranked 100%. Speaking of other future fights, it's kind of around the same realm of weight class, featherweight, lightweight. We had some major announcements drop. Last week. It was actually a week ago yesterday from the time that this is going to be put out. That all of the announcements, or all of the major announcements, I guess, for UFC 314 and UFC 315 were released. And of course, it started with the bombshell news that Ilia Topuria is vacating his UFC featherweight title and a move up to lightweight. There's no such word as to who he would fight. Although it seems like all signs are potentially pointing to an Islam Makhachev. There is a caveat with that, which we'll get to. We'll get to in just a little bit. But obviously, based on kind of what you and I knew going into the announcement, we were hearing rumblings that this might be a possibility, that he might move up, and to actually see that it's legitimately happening, that Ilia Topuria is moving up. I'll give my 2 cents on this first. I think it's very disappointing. I actually disagree with Danna in saying that he has cleaned out the entire division, because he hasn't. There are several names on the featherweight list that he is yet to fight that I think would give him problems. I think he would win the majority of those hypothetical matchups, but I do think him pulling the plug too early, really having not defended the title and not really cleaned out the division, although given the names he's beat, he does have a justification, but I feel like it isn't really a true title reign until you defend your title a couple of times. But in his defense, I will say, but very, very lightly here, because of his legitimate reason. If he feels like he can't make 145 anymore, power to him for moving up to a more natural weight, and featherweight is going to move on without him. So before we get to kind of what's going to go ahead at featherweight in Topuria's now absence, what were your initial reactions to this? And are you disappointed in this announcement, or are you like me, where it's going to take some getting used to that he's no longer the champion anymore?
It's definitely going to take some getting used to. I'm disappointed as well, to be honest with you, because yeah, he beat Volk and Holloway, but we were waiting on a Volk rematch. We were waiting on a Movsar Evloev fight. We were waiting on a Diego Lopes fight. Like, he still had a lot to do. He didn't even come close to cleaning out the division, to be honest. Not even close.
Not even close.
There are 3 legit contenders that he still needed to fight, in my opinion. And there would have been more after those 3. You know, someone else would have peeked their head out after those 3. Potentially a guy like John Silva, you know? But it's like, I just don't understand how you can't say he cleaned out the division, because that's just a lie.
No, you can't.
That's just a straight lie. That's not true. But at the same time, I understand if he wants to move up. I don't know. I don't know if I believe the whole weight cut was too much for him thing. I know Dana had said the weight cut was getting a lot. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. Maybe I think he just wanted to move up and continue his legacy at a different weight class and just, win that second title, quote unquote, even though he's not the champion anymore. It's weird. It's just a very weird situation. And I wasn't too happy with it, honestly. I thought he moved up prematurely. I thought, like a fight like Mobsar, right? I know that's the guy that's kind of been forgotten about in this whole mess, but that would have really shown us.
Speaking of Mobsar, he's actually probably the biggest loser in this whole thing.
Oh, 100% he's the biggest loser in this. But a fight against Mobsar really would have shown us how Topuria could have dealt with like Makhachev's wrestling. We would have learned a lot more about Topuria if he had these title defenses that he should have made, in my opinion. Unless the weight thing is true and he really just couldn't take it anymore. I don't love it. It just seems like he's going for legacy at this point. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I also don't know if he should just immediately get a title shot and moving up. He only had 1 title defense.
Right. And unfortunately, because I have to bring it up, it probably is just a little bit. I'm sure you'd agree to an extent. It probably is the favorite is something just a little bit, because I can guarantee you if it was some of these other champions without naming any names that are maybe quote unquote less marketed, people would have a totally different reaction. So
yeah, no,
I'm just saying. So
let me say this though. I mean, he moved up at the perfect time, because I went through the top 10 of the lightweight division. Of those top 10 fighters, 7 of them are coming off a loss right now, Zan. 7 of them. Like, that's kind of crazy. When do you have a top 10 of a weight class and 7 of those guys are coming off losses? There's only 3 coming off wins. It was Hooker, who just pulled out against Gaethje. It was Arman, who we know isn't getting the title shot because of his issues when he did get a title shot. And then I forget. And then I think the third was Charles, right? It was Charles. Charles was the third.
Charles Oliveira, because he just came off the win against Chandler. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So Charles was the third, and it's like, okay, Charles could get the shot or whatever, but does he fully deserve a title shot right now? I don't know. He could use another fight. It's just more would be because of the weight class and what's happening. So in my opinion, Ilia moved up at the perfect time. If he was going to move up, this was the perfect time, because there's no clear-cut anything at lightweight right now. There's not even a clear-cut next challenger. So it does make sense that he moves up now when there's not that clear-cut next challenger, because then he's either, got the title shot or he's just 1 fight away. But at the same time, I don't love the move in general. But in the sense of timing, he moved at the perfect time. This was the perfect time to make the move up to lightweight.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that when you break it down that way. And one other thing I'd like to add before we move kind of deeper into what the future of the featherweight division is going to look like too, I feel like now with Ilia moving up, it gives lightweight this intrigue that it probably hasn't had in several years, probably since, Khabib and Tony Ferguson were at the height of their powers at the time and they never fought. And now it's like, okay, with Ilia coming in, he has this fresh blood to where all of these lightweight contenders are going to try to essentially defend their territory, and they're going to be essentially trying to knock off the guy at featherweight that really seemingly nobody wanted to fight except for a couple fighters. So I think as much as the pressure is on Topuria to try to win the title, it's also kind of the pressure of the entire a, a division to still kind of say to themselves, "Oh, we still own our territory, even though you were a champion in another weight division just less than a week ago." So I think overall, this whole thing is very fascinating. You want to know what else is super fascinating? What else is super fascinating is the vacant title fight they made. Alexander Volkanovski finally gets his chance to potentially ride off into the sunset as a champion, taking on probably the most dangerous contender in that division in several years, the guy that came out of nowhere in Diego Lopes. This is a very, very fun fight. And this is almost, I don't want to say a gift wrap for Volkanovski to try to win his belt back, but you want to talk about the most perfect scenario for Volk, given the skid that he's on. This couldn't have worked out any better from his perspective. And now, as I just alluded to, he has a chance to go on top. What do you think?
I mean, it's crazy, it's crazy. Volk's on a 2-fight losing streak, I think it is now, so maybe even 3-fight. No, it's three. It is 3-fight. Yeah, he's on a 3-fight losing streak.
So he lost to Makhachev twice, and he lost to Ilia when he lost the belt.
Yeah, no, 100%. So it is interesting. So I don't know, like you got him versus Diego. It's gonna be fun. It's a nice stylistic matchup, especially for Volk, because Lopez is very well rounded. We saw that in his last fight. Like he can grapple very well, and he can knock you out on the feet, and mess you up on the feet. And Volk's very well rounded too. So it's really going to be interesting to see who's better at what areas. And I feel like it's a better fight for Volkanovski than the Topuria fight. I'll say that for sure. Definitely feel like it's better for him than going back into that rematch. But I just don't know how to feel about this fight, to be honest. I really don't. It's a very interesting fight. I do think it might have been the right fight. I know there's talk about the Evloev, situation. I do think Movsar got screwed over very heavily in this.
But in the UFC's defense, though, Volkanovski is a 50 times more marketable, prominent name than Movsar Evil is, to where I don't want to use this term in a negative way, but I would say this fight caters more towards the occasional UFC viewer than maybe the hardcore fan does.
No, for sure, because now Diego Lopes is becoming a name as well, so it's not like it's just on the Volk side, because Diego's making his name for himself as well. So both of these guys are both being able to be marketed a lot more than a guy like Movsar. It makes sense to me. I just think that poor Movsar keeps getting screwed over. He needs a title shot soon enough. No, like we got to do something with that guy.
No, for sure. I just worry. You know what I'm worried about, and you know me, so you should know kind of where I'm going with this. What I'm worried about is if Lopez somehow wins and the fight's like super controversial, and the UFC he's backed into a corner and they're like, "Oh shoot, we got to do an immediate rematch as quick as possible," and then the Mobster fight gets delayed even more.
So you found the one way that this could possibly be worse for Movsar. The one way it could possibly be even worse for the poor guy.
I'm just saying, man.
I know. You're right, though. You're right, because it's just this whole situation has been crazy. I mean, when do we get a champion just straight up vacating out of nowhere to move up into a weight class? The guy he beats in the title fight now, and for the vacant belt, and then the guy he's fighting has a loss to another top contender recently, and it's like, but he's on his own crazy win streak. Again, the whole situation's wild, to be honest, and I don't know how I feel about the fight.
It's almost like a ballooned version of when BJ Penn decided to briefly move from lightweight to welterweight back to lightweight again. So
yeah, no, this whole thing has been nuts, but I just, I mean, I guess we'll see. Right? It's going to be a good fight, I hope. So I'm very interested to see how this one actually looks when they get into the cage, because it's hard to analyze as of right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's hard to analyze for sure. We have a little over 2 months until the fight actually happens, but we do have a few more fights to go through on this card, including the co-main event. Michael Chandler is deciding to remain active, and he is fighting the undefeated, always brash and always has something to say, Paddy Pimblett, in a very, very interesting fight. It's one of these rare 5-round co-main events. I'll be honest with you, I was very shocked by this booking. I don't think Paddy Pimblett has done enough to deserve a name like Michael Chandler, but hey, more power to him. It's going to be a very, very interesting buildup. The buildup might actually be even better than the fight itself. And I'm very, very interested to see if all of Paddy Pimblett's words about him just kind of discrediting the entire division are going to come true, or if Michael Chandler's vows of him coming back and finally getting a signature win was still also, for whatever reason, keeping Conor McGregor in the back of his head. I don't know why he continues to do that. But I think this fight will be very, very interesting from a lot of different variables. Not just stylistically, but as I just alluded to, the hype aspect as well. I don't really know which way to lean. All I know is that whoever wins this fight, social media is going to go berserk.
Yeah.
So this is one of these tailor-made fights for people making the craziest reactionary take videos you've ever seen. And that's the part that I think I'm more excited about than the actual fight itself.
So I agree with you that the hype for this fight is going to be awesome, and it might even be better than the fight itself. I completely agree, because I can't wait to see these two go back and forth on the mic with each other. However, I do disagree in the sense that I do think Pimblett deserves this fight. I do. At this point, he's ranked. He's, been making a big name for himself. Everyone knows Paddy the Baddy, and Chandler is on a bit of a losing streak. He did need to fight down in the rankings. So with him having to fight down in the rankings, if you're gonna have him lose, you want him to lose to a guy like Pimblett that you can continue to build up, So I think it was really good matchmaking, to be honest, because I feel like Pimblett needed to get a fight like this soon enough. So him actually getting it now, it's big, it's big. And I think that this was the perfect fight because of that hype aspect, because these guys are gonna sell it, and because they can be a 5-round co-main event without anyone complaining. No one complained that this was made a 5-round co-main event. I think it's really good. I think it's a really good matchup. I think it's a great booking, and I'm honestly really looking forward to it. But let me say, I think I'm going to lean Paddy. As crazy as it sounds, I think I'm going to lean Paddy the Baddy.
Wow,
so
man.
It's pretty crazy, I know, but
yeah, I mean, you could be right, and you might lean me over to the Pimblett side too as the fight gets closer. But
we'll see.
You probably agree it's a very similar vibe to when McGregor fought Aldo, where it felt like everybody was on the McGregor side, and he goes out and he goes out there and wins in as quick of a fashion as he does. And I think the best part. I think the best part about this whole announcement, and I really do apologize to the person who tweeted this, because I really do want to thank you for your services. Someone tweeted the most relatable. Everybody was thinking that tweet that I've ever seen. It was Michael Chandler sat out for 2 years to wait for Conor McGregor and ended up fighting Paddy Pimblett.
That is really funny. I can't lie. That is really, really funny.
So if you want to talk about how excited people immediately are for this fight, with it being over 2 months away, I don't know, and I think this fight is a chance to overshadow a lot of the upcoming fight announcements for later on this year and whatnot. So
I agree.
That'll be very, very interesting. But there's one more fight on this card that we still have to go over. Patricio Pitbull is finally in the UFC. What are your initial takeaways on this, and are you excited to finally see him remain active after he was really, really vocal in requesting his release from the PFL?
Hell yes, I'm happy to see him finally get into the UFC. He deserved it, after his whole career, after everything, he deserved his chance in the UFC once Bellator was gone. And I'm happy that he's actually getting it now. The fight makes a lot of sense to me. If he wins, you might even be able to throw him into an immediate title shot. If not, he's one more away. It makes a lot of sense. I really love the fact that they signed him. I knew they were in negotiations with him for a bit, despite what Dana was saying. I know he was pushing with the UFC to get in for a bit. So I'm really happy to see that he actually ended up on a marquee card in a marquee matchup. And just, I'm happy to see Pitbull in the UFC. I'm looking forward to see what he can do. If you want me to be honest, you know what kind of vibes this fight gives me?
What?
Michael Chandler, Dan Hooker. When
Interesting.
when Michael Chandler entered the UFC coming out of Bellator, he got put in a matchup with Dan Hooker, and a lot of people weren't sure how it was going to go. And then he just went out there and sparked him. I feel like
Yeah,
we could get something
yeah.
similar in this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think Yair Rodriguez could very, very well be looking past him, considering that he still wants another crack at the title after losing to Volk a couple of years ago. In fact, that was Volk's last win before he went on his current 3-fight losing streak. But yeah, I could very well see that happen. It seems like these Miami cards really seem to bring out the best in these UFC debut type fighters, especially when you kind of look at where Michael Page was way back when as well. So I think it's another interesting booking, and I'm just very, very grateful because as you just alluded to, I think that Patricio Pitbull has wanted to get in the UFC for a while. The opportunities just weren't lining up, and to know that the stars have officially aligned and they were able to get a deal done. Well, let me just say this: I know zero about the inner workings of this deal, but I just hope for the love of goodness that the UFC paid him, because that man that man deserves it, and some he better be on the heftiest non-champion contract that they've created in such a long time, because what that man has done for the sport over the last 20 years cannot be overstated.
No, I
So
agree. Completely agree. He better be getting paid.
for sure, let's move on though to the Montreal event in May, UFC 315. Just really briefly, Belal Muhammad is now going to be fighting Jack Della Maddalena instead of Shavkat Rakhmonov, who was injured. So again, very, very interesting booking. I think it's a booking that, not a lot of people were expecting. So of course you might be wondering what's going to happen in the London card. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a second. But I think overall, an interesting booking, kind of a weird booking for Canada. You know how I feel. I feel like if you have two Chicago champions, you should strike where the iron's hot. But it looks like both of them are going to be fighting in different locations. This is one of them. What are your initial reactions? Given that the fight was supposed to be Shavkat, and given, kind of the stakes of that one versus this one, where we don't really know what JDM we're going to get until the fight actually happens.
Yeah, no, I mean, one, it stinks that Shavkat's injured. I mean, that was obviously the fight. There shouldn't be, any question that that was the fight that everyone needed to see, and it stinks that we're not going to be getting that now. But I feel like JDM is a solid replacement. I feel like he did make the most sense as a next potential person to fight for the title. So I did like that, and I like that, he gets a bigger opportunity now. He went from the main event of UFC London to the main event of UFC 315. So it's definitely going to be better for him in that regard. I don't know. I don't know how much I love it, only because I really wanted to see that Shavkat Belal fight. Like, that really needs to happen at some point. Even if JDM wins, Shavkat needs to be next. I like this fight. It's interesting. I just think it might be a little bit too much too soon for JDM.
For sure. And flipping over to the co-main event now, the UFC decided not to go with the Weili Zhang super fight, and instead go the I guess traditional route, if you will, and give Valentina the number one contender in Manon Fiorot. I'm excited for this co-main event. Manon's deserved this fight for a while, but and again, I think very similarly to what you just said about JDM, it might be a little bit too much for Manon, just considering that she's probably fighting the female flyweight goat. So I think it's going to have to be one of these virtuoso Holly Holm and Rousey-esque performances to try to get Valentina out of there. But we've seen crazier things happen before. What do you think?
I mean, this was the fight. We all knew this fight should have been coming. Fiorot deserved the title shot for a very long time. She definitely needed to get this shot at some point. I actually think she might pull it out. Valentina's at the tail end of her career, I feel like, at this point. And even though she's still the champion and just had a dominant win over Grasso, I just didn't love the performance. It was so dominant, but she didn't really impress me with anything in that fight, as crazy as it is to say. So I feel
No,
like Fiora,
and she wasn't trying to finish her either,
no,
which is kind of another aspect of it.
exactly, and I like Fiora. I think she looked incredible against Blanchfield, and I think she's looked incredible her entire UFC career. I remember I went back and watched her entire UFC run at one point, and I was like, wow, like she's been so impressive and dominant. Like I feel like she's just honestly set for the title at this point. So even if it's not here, I feel like she will be a future champion. I do think it'll be now, though. I do think she'll end up getting Valentina
Is it going to
out of
be
there.
wow? So you think she's going to actually you think she's actually going to find a way to finish her?
I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised. I probably would say decision, to be honest, now that I think about it. But I wouldn't be surprised if Fiora was able to really put the hands on Valentina at this point and potentially get her out of there, because Grasso was outstriking Valentina for the most part in some of those recent fights. So it was interesting to see. And I think that Fiora will find a lot of success.
Yeah, very interesting early lean. I don't really even early lean on this yet. I think I'll have a better idea as the fight gets closer, but I do think it will be a highly competitive women's heavyweight title fight, which is something we haven't really seen outside of the Grasso Shevchenko fights in quite some time. So it's nice to see a change of pace as well. A few more fight announcements that we have to go through though before we get into the very end of the show. What were kind of your overall reactions to some of these other fights that were announced, kind of scattered about across UFC 314, UFC 315, UFC London, and a couple others?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to give, very, very brief rundown of these fights. We have Leon Edwards now set to face Sean Brady for UFC London after JDM has moved to the title fight. We had Jose Aldo versus Ayman Zahabi for UFC 315, Jessica Andrade versus Jasmine Jasudavicius for UFC 315, and Davison Figueiredo versus Corey Sandhagen set to headline UFC Des Moines. So some very big announcements, top contenders, top fighters, big names. Like, these are massive fights, and it's crazy that we have to just skip over these because of all the other massive fight announcements this week. It's crazy that these just have to be skipped over, but these were all incredible fights. I mean, Zahabi and Jasudavicius fighting top contenders, legends in Canada is massive for them. That'll be the biggest fights of both their careers by far. Then you have, Sean Brady having to go over to London to fight Leon Edwards. That's a really tricky matchup for Leon Edwards stylistically. And then Figueiredo, Corey Sandhagen, that's a great fight. It's a title eliminator at bantamweight. It's one that really needs to happen. I feel like that's a perfect matchmaking, in my opinion. So I love it.
Yeah, and I specifically love the Figueiredo Sandhagen fight too because I'll be there. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how the Iowa crowd reacts to that. And I'm interested in the other bookings as well, and I think this hobby booking is very interesting, just considering that Aldo is a legend and former champion in the sport. All right, a few final topics before we get out of here. According to Diego Lopes, he said that in a meeting with the UFC, it very much looks like the UFC is going to move away from double champ status. It looks like Dana White rebutted some of those comments, but also scaled back and said that's not entirely the case. I think if the UFC is directly telling Lopes that they're not going in that direction, I would trust him. But what do you think?
I mean, from what I've heard, they are looking to get away from double champ bookings, not from Dana, but just in general. I have heard some talks that they are looking to kind of move away from that because of how much it holds up divisions and just holds up business. So it is interesting because I really think that we might see them in the future. But only in very specific and well-deserved cases, maybe like Wei Li. But even Wei Li, apparently they wanted her to move up to flyweight before she and vacate her title before she fought for the title. So it is pretty crazy because I feel like only certain champions, I feel like there should be a limit. I feel like 5 title defenses should be the clean limit. You have to have at least 5 title defenses before you're allowed to go for double champ status. I feel like having
It's a fair metric, I think. Yeah.
I feel like having something like that in place would be very, very beneficial because after 5 title defenses, there's not too many fighters at that weight class you can usually continue to fight without it getting into rematches and, certain things. So I feel like, if you want to move up after that, that's fine. But anything under that, I think you should have to defend your title more or just vacate and move up. So that's my opinion on the matter. but I hope that actually gets implemented. Something along those lines gets implemented.
Yeah, I hope something along those lines gets implemented as well. And just my brief thought on this too is if the UFC is looking to move away from the double champ status, I actually think it's a good thing because I don't think it was recognized all too often where we were getting super fights between one champion from one division and one champion from another. And when we did get them, it was scattered about to where the you just simply weren't consistent enough. So for the UFC to put kind of a hard stance on this, I personally think is the right way to go as one. I also think too, just hearing it from a fighter perspective, hearing it from a guy who is going to be fighting for a vacant title as the former title holder moved up in weight. I mean, I think I think that's a that's a relatively credible source considering that they're the ones actually fighting for
Fighting for that vacant championship. Yeah, no, you're right. You're
so
100% right.
so I mean, if he's literally laying out the scenario as someone who was as someone who was thrust right into it, how could you not trust him? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think overall it's very interesting, and I also think too on the same wavelength, I think it's gonna allow these champions to think about harder. Like, do I really want to move up? Do I really want to? Do I really want to risk relinquishing a title because there's a worry that potentially if I do relinquish my title, I may never get a chance to fight for my original belt against. There's a lot more questions than answers, I think, and that's the most interesting part about of this whole thing. But now it's time for us to move on. It's time for us to preview the UFC Vegas event this weekend. In the main event, it's a replacement main event, if you will. It's not what the original main event was intended to be, but UFC Vegas 103. And Okap versus Azu. Adebayo, what do you think of this fight overall? And do you think that this was a solid replacement given what the original main event was supposed to be?
Yeah, no, I think it's a solid replacement. I just want to throw this out there again. I think I mentioned before, but Almabayev being the first Kazakh fighter to get a main event in the UFC still blows my mind. It still blows my mind that he's, 4 fights into his UFC career, whatever it is, and he's getting the main event before Shavkat ever got one. It's just kind of insane. But with that said, I think it's deserved. I think he's a very, very solid prospect. He's looked great in his past couple fights. He's shown very competent levels of striking while being a dominant grappler. And I think he's a nightmare matchup for Kopp, to be completely honest. I think this is a nightmare matchup for Manel Kopp. I don't know if Kopp will be able to stop his wrestling and just his relentless pressure. And Kopp usually does better when you kind of, allow him to get into his zone. I don't think Almabayev's ever going to allow him to get into his zone. So Kopp's going to need to come out as sharp as possible and try to put Almabayev out early, in my opinion. And we'll see if he can do that. I mean, maybe Almabayev's gas tank becomes a problem in those later rounds if it gets to round 4, round 5. So that'll be interesting to see. But I do like Asu Almabayev in this fight. I really do think he's been impressive. And I think that we're going to see another flyweight contender rise to the top after this fight.
Yeah, I like Elmabayev in this spot too. And another thing that I'll mention that you didn't mention, which is totally okay, which I think further strengthens your argument, is the fact that Manel Kopp is minus 3 or 4 fights. He's been relatively inactive the last few years, and I think that it's really kind of overwhelmed his psyche a little bit versus Almabayev, where he's essentially just beat everybody the UFC's put in front of him with no problem. So
Yeah.
I think very, very similarly, I think flyweight is due for a few top contenders, and I think he has a chance to become one on Saturday night. I like him via 49-46 unanimous decision. What do you think?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I don't fully disagree. I don't know. I don't have an exact prediction set for this fight yet. I'd have to look a little bit deeper into it, but I do think Almabayev does get it done, and I probably would lean decision as well. So I think I'm with you there.
For sure. And just one final topic before we get out of here. We had the last crescendo. Dmitry Bivol finally gets his revenge over Artur. Beterbiev. Very, very, very exciting fight. Goes to the scorecards. Bivol gets the win. It seems like both guys are open to doing the trilogy fight. Just very briefly, what were your thoughts on this fight? Were you impressed with the adjustments Bivol made? Because I certainly was. And do you think that Beterbiev is justified to be disappointed, considering that he felt like he got screwed in a couple of the rounds that he felt should have gone his way?
No, I think
What did
Bivol made
what did you think?
No, I think Bivol made the right adjustments and just kind of, I think it was 3-3 after the first 6 rounds, something
Yep.
along those lines. I think it was pretty even after the first 6, and then Bivol just started to take over in those middle rounds. That's really what it was Bivol taking over those middle rounds and making the adjustments he needed to make the fight less close than it needed to be, I mean, I know it was still a majority decision. I did think Bivol won cleanly, I thought it was less controversial than their first fight. Thought their first fight was a closer fight. So I think Bivol did what he needed to do. And I know they're 1-1 now, so a trilogy makes a lot of sense. But I think Turkey Al Sheikh said that I think he said that David Benavidez would be next for the winner.
That would be very, very fascinating.
I
Yeah.
mean, come on. You're telling me you don't want to see Benavidez Bivol?
Of,
I'd
of,
love to see that.
of course I do.
Everyone wants to see that in my opinion. So I mean, I don't know. Like I wouldn't mind a trilogy by any means. I wouldn't mind a trilogy at all. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind seeing Benavidez fight Bivol either. So either way, I'm not going to be upset. But I've wanted to see Benavidez in a super fight for a very long time. So I feel like this definitely fits that category.
It's that category for sure, and I think that's a very, very good way to end it. Thank you again for tuning into another edition of the MMA Outsiders. This has been episode 116. We're going to be back at it next week to recap everything that was this this weekend's UFC Vegas event, and of course preview the very, very highly anticipated UFC 313 card from Vegas. But that's to my right. I'm Sam Bando. I hope you have a wonderful rest for your week, and just as a it's a quick reminder, as well as we always like to do in the show, just to please remember that the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. So until next week, we hope you have a good one, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Talk to you soon.